I was sitting at Harmony Heels, where I am now, and I was sitting in my chair in my office and was talking to a client about perspective. And I noticed that in her storytelling, her perspective was always from a painful experience and a negative bent. And each part of the story that she told me, which was a pretty innocent story about her day and meeting with friends and hanging out, every twist of the story kept having a negative and sad tone to the story. You know, I went to meet this friend, but we were at the movies, but what's the but, you know? Well, you know, I paid for them and they came in and I really liked the movie, but when we were leaving, they both said they didn't like the movie, you know, and there was like, I didn't really like it that much and it wasn't that interesting. And her bet on the story was that that meant it wasn't successful, that she hadn't spent her time well, that she had chosen to be in a negative space just by inviting two friends to the movie. And I remember sitting thinking with her going, okay, well, did you like the movie? And she goes, I really liked it. And I said, well, tell me about the movie. It happened to be Iron Man 3, in case you wanted to see it. Because it was off the hook. She loved the movie. It was like, you know, dramatic and cute boys and fireworks and whatever. You know, she loved it. And then I said, how does that change? Because they didn't enjoy it. How does that take away from your enjoyment of the movie? She said, because it matters more to me how they feel than how I feel. And of course, the story of perspective and the story of the negative bent is, where did you learn to bend your perspective in that negative force instead of in a positive way? And for her, it's family. In her family story and in her family history, it says nothing is ever good enough. Nothing is ever right. You don't show up in the way that we expect you to show up, and you don't express yourself in the way that we want you to express yourself. So every part of her story is about negative, is about seeing the world from that lens. When she was sitting in the office, what she told me was 2 days before that, she had reached her year of sobriety. And it's a benchmark year. She's 52, I believe, and this is the first time that she's had a year of sobriety since before she was a child. It was amazing. But even in that, she felt sorrow. She felt sadness. She felt lost. And she said, shouldn't I be further along at a year? Shouldn't I be better? And I'm like, better than what? Better than who? You know, like, better, like happy. And I said, what's happy? For you, what is happy? Where is happy? When do you experience it? And the times that she could describe it to me, interestingly, mostly she was alone. Which, for most of us, we struggle with isolation and fear of being lost and fear of being alone. And for her, sometimes in her loneliness she found, and her aloneness, she found the most joy. Because remember the beginning of the negative bent of the story, how you feel is much more important than how I feel. And only when she's alone can she separate you out of the equation and feel true happiness. And as we're sitting, and I told her nobody's going to believe us when I tell the story, and I'm so grateful that I get to tell it, because this happened yesterday. And as we're sitting and we're having this experience of perspective, a hawk flew into my window, like crashed into it. I mean, obviously it didn't break through. And I'm looking, and she's still speaking, and I'm like out of the corner of my eye going, did you see that? Like a bird just crashed into the window. And she's very like still telling me her sad story, and I'm like, okay, wait a second. Did you see that? I go, bird, just, you know, perspective. My eyes immediately went to this amazing out-of-body kind of like, when does that happen, right? And if you notice, I'm blocked by another building. I'm not in an open area. There's not a tons of trees around me. I'm like, how did that bird, like, he had to dive bomb up over the other building and to crash into my window? That doesn't happen, right? So I look at her and she goes, is that a hawk? And I go, uh-huh. She goes, I've never seen that in my life. And I go, me neither. So she stands up out of her chair and she looks out the window and she sees the hawk has fallen, and now the hawk is cooing. It's making this really neat sound, and she's like, is it wounded? Is it hurt? I said, I don't know. And she says, I wonder if we should go check on it. I said, let's give it a minute. And she keeps looking at it and she goes, that's amazing. And I go, uh-huh. And she goes, that doesn't happen every day. And I go, no. And she goes, how? Why? I go, I don't know. And then she said, well, should we do something? And I go, no. And so we sat and we watched this hawk. And as she's watching this, the expression on her face completely changed. And we sat for a minute, and I said to her, what do you think it means? And she goes, I don't know. And then I said, let's look it up. Thank God for Google. You can Google anything. What's the meaning of a hawk flying into your office window? So I Google it, and I already knew, but I wanted to have her have the exploration with me. I didn't want to take the joy out of it for her going, well, actually what that means, because I know everything, and blah, 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 and let me explain more to you. And take away her own joy that she came in saying to me, I don't know what makes me happy. I don't know how to be happy. I have a year of sobriety. And my life is good, and I'm sitting here crying in your office. Why am I crying? And I wanted to go with her in that story and say, that's okay. That's okay. That's part of your journey. That's part of your story. That's part of your being lost. And I want to be here and sit with you, but I don't want to take from you your joy in finding your truth and your joy in finding your honesty. What makes you happy? Not because I tell you as your all-knowing therapist what's the right path, or even if I tell you as your best friend or as your spouse or as your partner. You don't know my path. You cannot dictate my path to me. It has to be felt, and it has to be experienced, and it has to be brought to me. And maybe I need a hawk to run into the window for me to get what's next on my path. Where am I supposed to go? Where am I lost? Where am I wounded? Where am I hurt? We let the bird have its wound. We didn't take it from that. The bird learned something from that experience. Dude, don't dive bomb into black windows. You're gonna get hurt, you know? That bird learned something. So she sits down and we look it up. And it said, the hawk is about perspective. Wow. And I just looked at her and I go, oh my God, I'm tripping out. And I got goosebumps, and she goes, I totally have goosebumps right now. I'm like, yeah, it's about perspective. It's about how you see. It's about allowing yourself to soar up above the trauma and the wound and the hurt and the unhappiness, and see the bigger picture and see what is beautiful. Where am I okay in my life? What is working for me? Why am I stuck in what isn't working? Why do I keep myself cemented in what doesn't work? She got very excited and kept, you know, read. And I said, oh, well, okay. I'm like, damn, finally, I can just sit back and get paid to read to somebody. I've really arrived. So I'm like, all right, you know, so I'm reading her more of the story about, you know, getting outside of oneself, being present, being intuitive. The hawk was about intuition and listening. You have a greater purpose. You may not know what it is in this moment. And I go, huh? You know, I'm looking at her going, see? And she's getting very excited about it. And she says, I think I saw a feather. I go, I'm sure you did. And she goes, should I get it? And I said, I think you should. Her entire tone of the work that she was doing in the room with me changed by this moment. And she ran outside and she found this feather, and I said, you know, I have this belief that was given to me and brought to me in my family. They have a very strong Native American, I don't know why, because Cuban Native American, I'm thinking that's kind of weird because Cuba and the American, I don't remember they have an Indian over there because it's kind of hot. You know, I don't think they would have liked it so much, but okay. My dad said, you got native in you and your blood. And I go, oh yeah, okay, what you been smoking in that cigar, Dad? So I told her the story and I said, listen, you know, I was taught that when you let go of the need to control your life and the life of everyone around you, when you let go of the idea that you actually have the control at all, and you just give into the experience of breathing. We breathe because we must, and we do, and we don't think about it. And when you give into that life purpose of breathing, things come to you. And this feather came to you, and I said, every time that there's a change in my life, a feather falls. I know that sounds, woo, whatever, spiritual hokey. I'm not religious, I'm just me, but I'm open to what happens when a hawk flies into my window. And she said, oh my God, and she put her hair up, she put the feather in there, and she sat proud as a hawk and a peacock or whatever, like this. She goes, I feel really good right now. I'm like, yeah, you do. And I said, you know what? I feel pretty damn good too. And I went into my box and I said, I want to share something with you. And I said, I haven't shown anyone and I never thought to show anyone. And I opened a box of feathers that I keep in my office. And she goes, you're the feather giver. And then I said, I'm the witness of the feathers being given. You know, my role as a therapist is to be a witness. It's not about me, but it is about being present, and it is about mirroring, being present for other people. And she says, does it happen a lot? And I said, no, but it happens as it needs to, and when it needs to. And she says, is this spirituality? And I go, yeah. She's been talking and talking and questioning and asking me, what is spirituality? And in that moment, without any description, she received what that was. And she looked at me and she said, something greater than myself. I go, something greater than yourself. She goes, a hawk. And I go, a hawk. Whatever it is for you, that in that moment transformed the perspective of negative wound into beauty, into spirit, into life, into willingness to get up and do it again. You know, the hardest thing to do when you come from trauma, and believe it or not, this lecture is about trauma. I always get the heavy stuff. When you come from that place, you lose your perspective. When you come from a wound of abuse and criticism and abandonment and neglect and fear and punishment and isolation, whatever that wound is for you, whatever that trauma is for you, you lose perspective, because your perspective says, no one will ever see me the way that I need to be seen in order to feel loved. No one will ever hear me the way I need to be heard in order to feel loved. And no one will ever love me the way I need to be loved in the world in my lifetime, because the story from the wound of a trauma says that that is true, that you are unworthy of that recognition. When you walk someone through their trauma, and I always say this, and so I'll say it again, Pia Melody defines trauma as anything less than nurturing. Okay, got it. I got that. I got anything less than nurturing. You know, so in the spectrum of what could have been your life story, where you started from, in your relationship with your family, that's really where it begins. You know, it really begins at the root. It doesn't start up here as an adult. It starts at the root, you know, where you were planted. And in the story of that trauma, and in the story of giving a child those messages, they walk out into the world with an inability to have loving, relationships with other people and to relate to other people in a way that drives their spirit, that drives them to be at their best, that drives them to be successful. It's like an anchor. You know, I don't know what happened to the hawk. You know, I think maybe the hawk had an abusive mother, I don't know. You know, maybe it kicked it out of the nest too early. And so he was like, dude, I don't got this flying thing down yet. And you kicked me out. Bam, I'm running into buildings, you know. Like, it needed a little bit more time, you know, to be loved and held and nurtured. We talk about, you know, in this arena of therapy, you know, we talk about inner child, you know, and I was introduced to that, you know, John Bradshaw many moons ago. And I thought it was the most ridiculous thing, you know. Inner child this, like, what are you talking about? I'm me, and I'm not multiple that I know of, and what do I got to do with another little me? Like, I'm not even liking me, and you want me to adopt a concept of a little me that I'm supposed to like. And what happened was, when I could see other people in their innocent self, in their young self, in their stories of trauma. It's usually from a younger age, and when people tell me their story from that child, I see the child. I no longer see the adult. And when I could see the child in other people, I started to see the child within myself and understood how I had neglected myself from that negative perspective and that negative story and that negative message of not enough, not smart enough, not fast enough, not pretty enough, not enough. And passing that message on, as I told you with the woman in my office, and sitting with her, I said to her, I know that story. I know those words. I know that self-talk. The energy that it took to reparent self was tremendous, because I had to fight what I heard from what I came with and my growing up and my nurturing and my parents. I had to fight what I heard was their truth. And I didn't realize that I could have a separate truth from my parents' truth, even as an adult. I felt like to be separate from them was almost to deny them, and it's like rejecting them or denying Christ in a way. It was like immoral, and it's part of my culture. The idea that I'm this little person, this inner child, that I can love and give back to the things that I always wanted and needed, was very freeing for me. At first it was absolutely ridiculous. I went into a psychodrama workshop, and I'll explain that at another time, but it's a role-playing thing that I do. And the woman asked me to choose someone in the audience to be my inner child, and she wrapped her around my leg. Because I was a little pissed off at the time. I had some anger issues. I had to work through those. And she wrapped her around my leg because she saw how stuck I was in my anger, and I wasn't hearing that what was underneath the anger was a very wounded me, was a very hurt, very sad. But the messages of my family are, you do not cry, you suck it up, you be strong, you're better than that, you're stronger than that. Which is odd. I got both messages, you're not strong enough, but to the rest of the world, stronger than. So she put this person, an actual live adult, pretty big, on my leg and asked me to walk with her. And as I'm walking, I'm going to do it, but as I'm walking, like, I'm really angry because she's really like, she's heavy, and she's weighing me down and she's sobbing. And in the story, it was, I was fixated on everyone else in the story. The partner in the relationship, and my parents, and my brother, and I'm ignoring this person, and I'm trying to fix everything around me. And this person is just shrinking, you know, and she's pulling on me, and she's weeping. And this person looked at me because she began to experience herself, her inner child and herself and her wound, and I must have been her angry parent yelling at her. But all I saw was these humongous eyes looking at me. And she just starts weeping. And I'm like, oh my God. And I saw the neglect, the self-neglect, by ignoring my own feelings, my own thoughts, and converting them so that you would be happy, or you would be happy, or you, just doing that to myself was a form of neglect that I did not understand. And when I saw that in her, because I didn't beat myself, I didn't cut, I didn't, you know, do outwardly abusive things, but I denied myself who I am every single day. I needed that understanding to begin to have compassion for the parts of me that I was losing, I was giving up on. My story, my dream, my wishes, my vision for who I was getting lost. In this experience of trauma, you have to find those wounded parts of yourself, and you have to retrieve them. I always say, go back to where you lost yourself and go reclaim yourself. I had to pick up that little girl and make an amends. I know it sounds so silly, and it looks silly, and my clients tell me, this is so silly, this is so stupid. I go, I know, it is so stupid. It really is. But dude, we're gonna do it anyways. And I get on the floor with them, and I do it because I've done it, you know. And I grab that girl, and I don't think I've ever cried. I cry easily, but I mean like that, from my soul, you know. And because I knew that I was part of the problem, that I had become part of the problem, that I had carried the trauma like a trophy around, and said, see, this is why I can't trust the world, and see, this is why you can't get close to me. And it became an excuse, and it became a barrier, and I became a puppet, and I was a show, and I could put on a show, but you never knew who I really was. And you weren't going to know that until I knew, until I was willing to let you see me cry while you play amazing music. You know, see me cry, and see me be vulnerable, and see me be present. And I don't care if you like me today. And that's a gift. In trauma, the lesson, I'm putting myself in the story, not to use the client, but I was teaching her a lesson too. I have to love myself. I have to forgive I have to cry. I have to have my bad days. I have to look out the window for the hawk. I can't get lost in what you need and what you want and how to fix in order to get better. I have to really be present to that wound in order to heal that wound. I can't ignore it. We have learned as a culture to deny every emotion. Every thought that isn't absolutely ecstatic is just denied, is just pushed, is just given a pill, is given an injection, is given a whatever, you know, a cruise to the Bahamas, any distraction. We're all about distraction, you know, in our culture. We don't know how to sit present when we hurt, you know, and to cry. You know, somebody was telling me that even this morning. One of the gentlemen that came through that was visiting said, I noticed that we've lost grief. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, people don't grieve. And I said, no. How is that right? And I said, it isn't. How do we get that back? When we do, and then others do, and you pass it on, you know. As a therapist, the training is very clear. I get in trouble for this on YouTube. I'm very specific, you know, you're not to cry and get too personally attached to your clients, and sit at a distance and cross your legs. And when you speak like this in this kind of manner, they understand that you don't have any feelings about what they're saying or doing, and you're just observing. Are you kidding me? I'm going to say this publicly. I took the oral exam 3 times. Between the lines. 3 times I took the oral exam. The first, the second, and the third. And the only thing that changed, and that's a trauma story for me. I was very traumatized by being rejected in that manner so publicly. When I was told, oh my God, you're such a great therapist, you're so fantastic, I go, apparently not good enough. I can't pass the exam. The first time I took it as Gina, I had a lot of Latina in me. I was wearing a white suit, fly. My hair was done. It was big hair, because I was still in the 90s, okay? So I had my hair, I'm like, hey! And I'm talking to the adjudicators, and my hands are going, and they're like, they're getting traumatized by me. The second time I took the exam, I toned it down a little bit more neutral, not so high a heel, but I was still me. I didn't pass. And I went, oh my God, how is this possible? I had studied the same. I knew everything inside and out that I needed to know, because you don't know everything ever in your life that you need to know. What I needed to know for that exam. So I went into hypnotherapy and meditation. And hypnotherapy, I visualized. And what I visualized was a different me. And the different me, her name is Ida. She's Jewish, in New York. And she wears a colored dress, and it's like got a bow in the back, and it's very like, it's very conservative, and her hair's up, and she has no makeup on. So anyway, so Ida, and I literally pictured a caricature person that would go in and take the test and would pass. And I knew when I went in that I would pass. When I walked into the room, and I had a cardigan sweater on, which I don't even own. I think I burned it after that exam. Can you picture this in a cardigan? Seriously, come on. So, I am so Latina to my heart. So, I sat down and I looked, and the adjudicators, the first time was a male and a female, were significantly older than myself. The second time were two females. They both smoked a lot and reeked, and they were hunched over, and they were not happy. And the last time there was two women about my age. So I'm just going to throw that in there. Someone who likes to do statistics can figure out what that was all about. But there's two females, and they were about my age, and one of them was dressed almost identically to Ida. So check that. And I walked in, I go, okay, I'm going to pass this time. I took a glass of water, which was my pre-hypnotic suggestion to drink water, and then I would kind of go into this trance, right? I sat the cup down. I don't remember a thing. I took that whole exam. I'm sure I was in a trance state. There you go. I passed on the third round. Hypnotized, by the way. Give that girl a license. Let her go. So literally, and I tell you this story because that was traumatic for me. I had to weep and grieve, back to the grief, the first time and the second time, that I could not be accepted as me, walking into a room where I was going to do what my absolute passion has been and still drives me to do. And I had to transform myself to this other being to be acceptable, for others to accept her and give me what it was that I needed. That to me was traumatic. That took me right back to my history. Now I had a choice. Like my beautiful client who sat in the room with me yesterday. I could now take that and take the wound and keep that wound with me of being rejected as a therapist into every therapy session that I ever had. It's a choice, right? Or I could look at it and say, you're so smart, you figured out how to do it, and they don't even know that you're crazy, and you went in and you pretend be somebody else, and you got the license, so just do whatever you want, right? Absolutely. I said, all I needed to do was do what I needed to become who I need to become, and I can't allow you, one more time, the representation of the family or the trauma, the BBS becomes that. I will not allow you to stop me, to impede my ability to continue to become who I'm supposed to become in spite of your wound of rejection and in spite of your wound of abandonment. That's trauma, but that's the healing from trauma, if you will allow and if you will risk to grieve the parts of yourself and to grieve that precious child and to grieve the woman who was rejected. For the woman in my office to grieve the horrific abuse that she endured the majority of her life. Just to grieve it and let go, to give the possibility to become that person that she so desperately wants to become, so that she can feel that joy that she so desperately wants to feel. That's healing trauma for me. And that's my lecture.